Well, I'm happy to be here, and it's been, I think, 4 years that we've had purely virtual meetings, so it's nice to have a few people in the room and see that interaction happening. So thank everyone for coming, if you're here in person. We've always had the new format, the virtual format actually has been very positive for us. Over the years, back when we had a purely in-person meeting, we had roughly 90 to 100 people, which was really good in person, I thought. But when we went to virtual, we've exceeded 200 every year, and this year we're well over 300. So the 301 you see here is really from 2 days ago, and we've had registrants since then. So thanks everyone for your interest and willingness to spend a few hours with us today. I want to particularly thank Jess Krasinski, who you just heard with the wonderful announcer's voice. Thank you, Jess, who is our senior project manager and has really led the way in organizing this meeting, and it's gone quite well. And most important, we want to encourage you to ask questions during, at the end of each talk, but also we have a session, a platform session at the end of each, the morning session and the afternoon session, for us to get additional questions in. Because really, one of the most important parts of this is to have the back and forth for individuals to understand the interests of the audience and to really address issues that we don't get to in our presentations. Each year I show this slide just to we're a government agency basically, so we don't really look at money as our measure of success, but one thing we look at is publications, and radar system publications have been cited throughout and continue to go up. And one last thing I want to do is to thank the team back home, largely, that puts all the information together that you're going to see from radars. As you can imagine, we have massive amounts of data from 7 or 8 different programs coming in basically continuously throughout the year. So the data management tasks are large, and we have a great team that works on the data management. We have a wonderful biostatistics team. Use a lot of words that I don't understand, but it's okay. We get good data that I can look at confidence intervals, et cetera, and get that together, so thanks to them. And then, of course, the generally underappreciated group of people that are project managers, because while all us scientists think we're very smart, really nothing gets done unless we have it organized and have a goal that we're pointed at. And so that's the project management team. So thanks to everybody for your efforts and coming to a peak right now for the data we're about to present. So opioid crisis. We all talk about the opioid crisis. What we're going to do today is the morning will be on opioids and some other drugs as well, like benzodiazepines. The afternoon session is more focused on psychedelics because that's such a rapidly emerging area. One of my favorite sayings is, the only constant in life is change. Or as I like to say to the team, change is good. Every time we have a change and everyone's moaning, change is good. It's an opportunity for us. And we've known this for 2,500 years. You might think I'm old enough to know Heraclitus, but I don't. Never managed to meet him, but he was a very wise guy, I can tell. We tend to think of the opioid crisis like this, and CDC is very good at producing mortality data to inform us, and it's very important data. I use it all the time. Often misinterpreted by various people, or misunderstood might be a better term. And everybody sees this figure and thinks this is the opioid crisis, and this is part of the crisis, but I think of it as in terms of a drug crisis, a drug-related mortality crisis, to be more specific. And one of the themes I'm going to go into is the fact that while opioids are crucial and very important, there's a common assumption out there that they're the only problem. Perhaps not the people in this meeting probably have a better awareness of that, but if you look at the general population, especially talking to reporters, what you hear all the time is the only thing they want to talk about is opioids. And often not able to have the understanding to make the distinction between different types of opioids. With all this change happening, right, it's very important to have data to inform your decisions. Otherwise, you make important policy decisions based on anecdotes, politics, and opinion. There's a proud, there's a proud tradition of that in most societies, including the United States. But in reality, we need data. And so that's what RADARS does. And we've always pushed for the concept of mosaic surveillance, which simply means looking at issues from multiple different perspectives and integrating that information to come to a conclusion, rather than just do what often happens in the press, grab one study that just happened to be published, especially if it's in a major journal, and then deciding that represents all of opioids or all of stimulants, whatever the paper's about. These are the surveillance systems that we use, and starting on the lower left, mortality, CDC, we use that all the time. Very important as an anchor and as a trend to see what is emerging over the years. We look at acute health events through our poison center system, which is 51 centers across the country. People calling for help when they have an exposure. We look at substance use in our opioid treatment programs. I won't go into much detail on these programs, but basically these are people entering treatment for substance use who tell us what drugs they're misusing, why, how, the route, et cetera. Our population survey, and we have now 2 of them, which you'll hear a lot about. The one you've heard about before is NMURX, the non-medical use of prescription drugs, but NSIGHT, which it gets into the hallucinogenic trends, that's the HT, will be presented mostly this afternoon, and really has some interesting findings that I'm very eager to hear people's reaction to. Drug transactions, that's investigators across the country who report to us when they open a investigation into a physician or a patient or an arrest on the street, and what drugs were present in that transaction. We have the street price, or streetrx.com, which is where people actually enter into a website what drugs they have bought on the street, how much they paid for them. And then we have a new program, therapeutic use of psychedelic drugs, and this is we call the Healing Center Program. We'll hear a little bit more about that. That's in development right now. To understand better how these drugs are being used in a therapeutic manner, albeit hallucinogens, albeit outside of the FDA regulatory structure. So let's jump into the data. Each year we start with a recap of RADAR's observations over the last year. And I'm going to start with the prescription stimulants this year in the Poison Center program. So these are the number of contacts, or calls mostly, that a poison center in the United States has received per 100,000 population since 2012. And you can see not too much is happening here. You might even say the amphetamine has decreased a little bit. And so if you look just at the Poison Center program, one wouldn't see much effect. But we have to understand poison centers are people calling for help spontaneously. That doesn't necessarily correlate exactly with misuse and abuse. So if we look at prescription stimulants in the drug diversion program, so these are investigators reporting what they're finding when they, on the streets and in state programs, it's a little bit different story. Amphetamines have been rising. The prescription amphetamines have been rising since 2012, basically. So it's about twice as high as it was in 2012. But even methylphenidate, you can see, is increasing. It's not as dramatic, and a lot of that is in the last year or two, basically post-COVID. But we see an increase in what they're seeing on the streets. So that's a pretty important observation, I think. I always thought that these would stabilize, especially the amphetamines, but they simply haven't. This is NMURX, which is our national survey, which produces nationally representative data. And that started in 2019. So this axis on this only goes from 2019 to 2024. Again, the rate per 100,000 population. And you can see that since COVID, I should say, we've seen an increase really in everything: amphetamine, methylphenidate, and another drug we measure, I just threw in here for fun, is modafinil. And we're seeing increasing endorsement of that by people filling out the survey, really starting perhaps during COVID, but certainly since COVID. I don't have a theory behind this, but it's an observation, and taken in connection with the drug diversion data is pretty concerning, although if we look at the poison center data, it doesn't seem to be resulting in a lot more calls to poison centers. So if we summarize that, no increase in the poison centers, but increasing drug diversion and endorsement by people nationally. And NMERX goes out to all people, not just people who endorse substance use. And so this is really a population representative program. I didn't show data on this, but the primary forms are immediate release preparations. The extended release certainly are present in those data, but immediate release Adderall is probably the biggest one. Okay, now let's move to opioids. In the Poison Center program, we have all of these data are fascinating, and this year is really showing some trends that I'm not sure we appreciated fully before. Here's all opioids combined in the Poison Center program from 2012 till today, and you can see it's generally going downhill, although there's that bump during COVID. We've talked about that in a couple previous meetings, and if I show you the individual active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs, we see that the vast majority of that is accounted for by oxycodone. And that's probably because in the Poison Center program, when a person calls in, there's a specific regimen that a SPI, a specialist in poison information, goes through to ascertain the identity of the drug that the person took. Sometimes they don't know for sure, but if they bought a counterfeit, for example, which I'll show you in a second, and they thought it was oxycodone, then that gets registered as oxycodone. And because this is focused so much on oxycodone, it's quite dramatic, but has gone down since COVID really dramatically, which is fascinating. These are what a lot of the M30s, or there's a lot of different names for these, roxicodone, M30s, et cetera. They're basically 30 milligrams of oxycodone that's easily crushable. So very convenient drug for people to use, misuse, and transport, because these pills are pretty small, so it's an easy thing to do. If we look at treatment centers, so this is people now actually entering treatment, and at their first visit, they fill out a questionnaire of what they're misusing. Generally decreasing over time in terms of the opioids, because this is people coming for a lot of different reasons, but generally decreasing for prescription opioids, right? So a lot of these would be illicit fentanyl people, but the prescription opioids are going down nicely, except maybe at the end there where we start to see some flattening. And when you look at the individual APIs, you get more of that feeling for oxycodone is the most popular and frankly has been since the beginning. It's almost all generic oxycodone, despite the rumors or the allegations in the press that this is all Oxycontin. It never was all Oxycontin. It wasn't even close to all Oxycontin. It's almost all immediate release and has been since we started in 2006. Hydrocodone is second. But what a little bit concerning is that during COVID, you can see things start to flatten, and they seem flatter or even possibly increasing in some cases since COVID. So it makes me worry that we're seeing a return to prescription opioids, and that's something we should be concerned about. Looking at the drug diversion program, it's a little bit more concerning even, because we see that overall the major opioids combined went down until COVID, and then they had increased encounters in law enforcement, which is very odd if you think about it during COVID when there was more limited interpersonal interactions. But they actually went up, reports actually went up. And it hasn't really recovered, as you can, when you look at the individual AP opioids, this is primarily comprised by oxycodone, buprenorphine, and hydrocodone there. So, although I think the other ones are lower volume, but also have either stopped going down or maybe increasing slightly. If I look at the non-medical use of opioids, so this is the national survey that we take, you can also see an increase in reports of non-medical use of opioids. Now, in a survey, of course, the person is identifying what they think they used. So you always have to be a little careful about that, especially in the case of oxycodone, as I mentioned earlier. But when we look at the individual APIs, what we see is that oxycodone is going up some, but so are several other drugs, and that's concerning. There seems to be a general movement towards prescription opioids, again, both in the diversion data, also in NMURX. And if I focus, this is just remove, well, so I forgot to say, if I remove, there's axis compression here because the total is so much higher than heroin and fentanyl, but if I remove that on this slide, we can see that illicit fentanyl in particular is being endorsed a lot more in NMURX. Not that surprising, to be honest, but pretty striking. Now, how does this relate to national mortality data? I mean, those are two different things, obviously. One is the person using the drug, the other is the person dying from using drugs. And this is prescription opioids only. It's sometimes confusing to look at the CDC figures because they're all so similar, but I just want to emphasize this is prescription opioids only. You can see they've plateaued, maybe decreased a little bit. But I think the two lines in there are really revealing. One shows involvement of fentanyl in the death that included a prescription opioid, and you can see that's the yellow line that has increased substantially. And for opioids that are or for deaths that don't involve fentanyl, which is the whatever color line that is, white basically, is going down substantially. So you could interpret this two different ways. One would be, oh, all the controls we put on prescription opioids is working, because then they die of an illicit fentanyl. It's like kind of a mixed blessing, right? Like, okay, I decreased the use of the prescription opioids, but they're dying. It just had now illicit fentanyl instead of the prescription. The other thing that makes me think about, and I think is really an issue, is that I don't know that it's the controls we placed as much as it is illicit fentanyl simply outcompeting prescription opioids, meaning that illicit fentanyl has become so available and cheap that that's where a person goes for their drugs rather than trying to go through the effort of getting it through the medical system. For summary for this section then, overall the measures of prescription opioids are decreasing. We have to be happy about that. However, these concerning recent trends I think are actually a real issue and one that I obviously chose to emphasize this year. I wrote oxycodone and buprenorphine, but I should add tramadol. Tramadol has gone up a lot. And there seems to be, I don't know if it's a shift or what exactly is going on there. Tramadol, of course, technically is not as dangerous acutely as the other more potent opioids, but that increase is concerning for sure. Another observation out of the CDC data is we focus on the 80,000 deaths or so that are from opioids. Here, I actually got these sort of upside down. So the bottom one shows the any opioid death, 80,000, but the top figure shows all drug-related deaths, which is well over 100,000. So basically, we have 25,000 deaths that, to be honest, I don't think are getting the attention that they should get. If we had something new come along that killed 25,000 people a year in the United States, it would probably get a lot of attention. But it seems to get lost in the opioid story and doesn't get as much attention as at least I would like. And I wanted to just give you a taste of this, which also comes from the CDC data. And my two favorites, well, my favorite is benzodiazepines because they seem to be the most overlooked addictive drug that nothing seems to happen to. I mean, they just keep killing people year after year, and it never gets much attention. As you can see in the figure there, a lot of them are involved with illicit or with fentanyl, okay, or I should say synthetic opioids, the yellow line. But there's some scale compression here, but if you look at the light color, the white line, you can see that even deaths involving benzodiazepines, but not including an opioid, have probably tripled or quadrupled over since 1999. So there's something else going on there. These days, pretty much all coroners are testing for fentanyl if they have a suspicious case. So I don't think it's a testing issue as much as this general increase in a bunch of different drugs. And when you look at something like the antidepressants, you see exactly the same phenomenon. Now, why would someone who died with involvement of an antidepressant, again, fentanyl has a big effect here, but even the cases without fentanyl have doubled at least. So there's a societal trend behind these numbers that just doesn't seem to get the attention. Maybe it's too complex a message for the news, for the public, but really is impressive to me. And I want to point out that that's really includes a lot. There's a lot of other drugs that are showing, like even diphenhydramine shows this pattern. Now, in NMERX, we can ask a lot more detailed questions. All you get from me is this high-level stuff. But I looked at opioids, stimulants, and benzodiazepines to see what these categories were doing. And you can see that whether it's all non-medical use, all abuse, medical misuse, et cetera, ED visits, they're all going up for all the drugs. The most for opioids, but also going up for stimulants and benzodiazepines. So we have a societal issue here. I don't know how to address it more effectively, but it's widespread, includes both prescription and OTC medications, mostly CNS active drugs. Means it seems like almost anything that messes you up in your brain has someone who wants to abuse it. Both misuse and mortality are increasing. It really raises the question to me of, actually, can we use as a society CNS active drugs safely? It makes you wonder sometimes, because it seems like if you give a patient the opportunity to misuse their prescription opioids, use multiple prescribers, et cetera, they do it. It's a small portion of them, but it's an important portion of them. So what that means is, does REMS work? So I put that in there to shock everybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to indict REMS. In fact, I'm going to do the opposite, because I think there's a lot of papers out there like this one. There's little evidence demonstrating the effectiveness of the REMS program. Pretty harsh, I think. Another one is FDA's REMS, effective and efficient safety tools, or process poltergeists. I guess alliteration is hot these days. What I want to show, though, is that my impression has been just the opposite, to be honest. And so for people who are watching who may not understand REMS, if you know REMS, you can turn off your brain for the next 30 seconds. REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, and a TASU is Elements to Assure Safe Use. These two are related, as I'll show in a second. And TASU is part of REMS. It can be, and FDA, these are concepts that FDA applies to medications that have serious safety concerns, not just misuse and abuse. It could be other things as well, but have serious safety concerns, like life-threatening or major life-altering types of concerns. And what it does in general is very, very logical. It tries to improve the communication of risk to patients and clinicians. It requires some actions related to safety. I'll show you those in a second. And it may require physical interventions like packaging or disposal systems or et cetera. You'll see here in a second. The important thing is that this allows FDA probably to approve drugs that they wouldn't normally, meaning the risk would be too high if it were just distributed like a regular pharmaceutical. A great example is Spravato, which is esketamine. And this is from their website showing the different domains that they have to address based on the REMS. And rather than dwell on that, I'm going to just show you some results. Actually, I'm going to do, I don't like the order I put these, so I'm going to show you this. Here's what REMS will do. What REMS accomplishes, and here I'm showing ketamine, S-ketamine, sufentanil, and GHB, which is what sodium oxybate is, the prescription form of what we call GHB. And what the REMS at PASU creates for those drugs. So if you look at ketamine, and we all know there's been some very high profile, unfortunate cases of ketamine recently, there's really, the only restriction is that it's a Schedule III drug. And so it does have those controls, but they really have no other controls. Esketamine, which is essentially the same, right? It's an enantiomer of ketamine, actually more potent than ketamine, has certain required aspects like controlled access. Prescribers have to be actually certified on that particular drug. Pharmacies have to be certified. And the drug is actually administered in an observed manner. In other words, that you have to watch the patient take it. It's a nasal spray, so and it's administered in the office. Sufentanil has very similar requirements, and sodium oxybate is a drug that the patient does take at home, and so the drug eventually gets to the patient, but it's done through dedicated pharmacies that are tightly controlled, so you have that control, but it is not observed administration. Now, there's other parts of these programs. I'm not trying to give a complete description, but the idea is to say that those controls lead to very different data when we look at these. So this is from a paper that we just published from our system, and this, I'm focusing just on NMERX in this particular slide, but the top line is ketamine over the years in NMERX, and the bottom line is S-ketamine. So as S-ketamine has become more popular and had more and more sales, we've seen no increase in the endorsement of misuse. To me, this is amazing, frankly. I mean, it just shows that whether you agree with the limitations placed by FDA or not, they work. I mean, because this drug would certainly, there's no question that if this drug was widely available under common, like just under prescription, a patient could take it home, we would see a lot more endorsement of misuse and abuse. And I can look at all the different programs that we have in radars, and you see these numbers for ketamine. I won't go over them individually, and you have these numbers for S-ketamine. It's almost like S-ketamine is just not diverted because it's given in the clinic, very little of that. We do get a few endorsements in treatment programs, but really minor activity for a drug that is a potent addictive substance. And then I just take that a step further and add sufentanil and sodium oxybate, Xyrem to this. Those numbers for ketamine and S-ketamine are the same that I just showed you. In sufentanil, so sufentanil is a very potent opioid that people would love to get their hands on if they could. It has very similar restrictions, and it's given under the tongue, sublingually, under observed therapy in largely surgical centers and that type of setting. We see nothing in any of our programs. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm not saying, I don't know if the balance is right, because these are pretty tight restrictions, but they seem to work. If I look at sodium oxybate, that's supposed to be oxybate, and actually should say GHB, because what I wanted to point out here is I'm not reporting the data for the other programs, but for poison centers in particular, I just took a quick look. We have one poison center case that mentions Xyrem in all of our centers, and 23 that mention GHB. So that would be illicit GHB. So similar pattern to all the others. One of my favorite sayings is, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. We can whine and moan all we want about whatever it is, but the truth is, the reason those results are there is because the system produced them, and it's exactly what it was designed, maybe not designed, but what it was allowed to produce. So if we want to change the results, the only way to do that is to change the system. So if you aren't familiar with Deming, he's sort of the father of the lean process, which we use a lot at Denver Health, and is one of my favorite topics. So in summary, we see misuse of prescription stimulants is rising, misuse of prescription opioids is rising, misuse of other medications is rising. These are drugs with considerable abuse potential. And I just have to point out that REMS Atasu has been very effective in the cases I just showed you. I understand that it's harder to detect that, for example, a drug like the commonly orally administered, 2-4 times a day type of opioids. But the question is there a lesson there that we can learn that could be applied to other drugs? Maybe not every single thing. I can't have observed therapy for every dose of roxicodone, for sure. But on the other hand, is there not things we could learn from the success stories to apply to the other types of prescription drugs? All right, so that's the end of my formal presentation, and what I want to do now is just highlight our speakers. So this morning, as I mentioned, we'll be dealing mostly with opioids and similar drugs like stimulants and benzos. The world, as I mentioned, has changed, and Dr. Sokolowska will be giving a presentation on that from FDA, and thank you very much. This meeting is in person because of Marta. She's harassed me for years about meeting in person again, so we're doing it. We'll see how it works. Also, Nab Dasgupta, Dr. Dasgupta is here from University of North Carolina. He's a longtime collaborator with RADARS, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. And then Joshua Black will be giving a presentation this morning. Some very fascinating data. You'll, I think, find this amazing. And then there's me. This afternoon, we have Dr. Gandotra from the CMO from SAMHSA. God, too many initials. Very lovely that he's coming, and we really appreciate that. We have Erica Siegel, who I think you'll find is a different type of presentation than we've normally had. She actually works with patients and in the psychedelic realm, and has become an expert on the safety of those. And besides amazing stories that she can tell, gives a wonderful talk on the adverse effects of the psychedelics. Dr. Monte and Carrie Rockhill are from our program, and they're going to present, I think, some data that you'll find very thought-provoking, and I think we'll have a long discussion after that, because there's some encouraging and disturbing information in those presentations. So that's the end of my presentation, and I think we now go on. Oops. Since this is the political season, this is for you folks who live in Washington. All right.